How and why did you decide to write an anti-Islamic book? How was your life in regards to faith? What did you believe in? What was your heaviest and most regretful expression that you used for Islam? What was the reaction of the people around you when you became Muslim?
I thought to myself, Islam is a lie. Islam is a danger. I got over 2,000 death threats. And in the end, I decided to write an anti-Islam book. God, give me a sign so that I 100% sure know this is the way. I couldn't sleep for it for 2 days. I couldn't accept it. It was so strange.
What was the reaction of the people around you when you became Muslim?
Most of them were very negative, of course. For a lot of people, especially some uncles and aunts, it was kind of a shock. They heard it when it was on the news. I told my mother, and my mother started crying. And my wife was pretty open. Yeah, she was very cool about it. She said, well, if Islam is what you really believe and that's in your heart, who am I? And yeah, some people from my old work were really aggressive. I got over 2,000 death threats from people who used to support me, of course. People who voted for me. People said the most horrible things. We will rape your wife, shoot you, we know where your children go to school, stuff like that. And most of them, of course, is nonsense because they're crazy people writing things on their computer. So it was kind of a hectic time. And I had to tell my work, of course, and it was this Christian organization. So to say that the leader of the pack, he said, I can't believe it. And he said, well, I noticed this change when you talked about certain topics on radio. You were kind of a little more mild, not so harsh anymore, but you becoming a Muslim. And after I said, yeah, I became Muslim, he said, I couldn't sleep for it for 2 days. I couldn't accept it. It was so strange. But the hardest part for me was telling my grandfather, because my grandfather was dying and he was 93, 94 years old and he was on his deathbed at home. I had to tell him, and my mother told me, yeah, you have to tell your grandfather. It was her father. So I said, well, then you have to come with me. It's got like a shield. And I just said, well, grandfather, I became a Muslim. And then he closed his eyes. And I thought he stopped breathing because, yeah, he was so old. And he really stopped breathing for a while. And then he started breathing again. And he looked at me and he said, well, at least you didn't become a Catholic. So it was very funny. The last thing, and my old boss from the radio, he said, well, but how do we know that you're not becoming Hindu one day or something else? And I told him, well, I never chose a religion. One time, and it was when I became a Muslim. Before that, I didn't choose my religion. I was born in a Christian family. I was raised in a Christian way. And I'm very grateful for all the good things that it brought me. But it was not my decision. And the only time I made a decision was me becoming a Muslim. And it was the most, like I said, I think the most important decision I made. And it was the most rational decision I made. I never took years and years to decide one thing, only becoming a Muslim.
How did you feel when you made your first salah?
It's, of course, a beautiful moment, but very strange as well. Because as a Christian, you're not used to pray like that. You pray with your hands together and perhaps on your knees in front of your bed or something. But I think it's very beautiful that you really prostrate. So you really bow down in the deepest way for your Lord. So that's a very humbling, beautiful thing, I think. And that, yeah, it made me feel very happy.
What were the 3 biggest challenges you faced when you converted to Islam?
Well, becoming a Muslim, of course, was a big challenge because I had to tell the world and family, and that was a big challenge. The part of thinking that it would be very hard to become a Muslim because, especially as a Protestant Christian, there aren't so many things you have to do in a religious sense. As a Muslim, in terms of practice, so it is required to pray 5 times a day. It's required to eat in a certain way. It is required to think in a certain way. You have to be the best in a way every moment because of your relation with your Creator and because of the fact that you have to pray 5 times a day. It's a constant reminder in a way of the Creator, so that makes you much more aware of the fact that you have a Lord than as a Christian. That's how I experienced it. And I thought to myself, whoa, 5 times a day praying, I cannot do this, I cannot do that, I have to do so that made it hard in the head. But after I became Muslim, it wasn't hard at all.
Are you raising your kids as Muslims?
Well, you try, of course. I don't know, when you're really raised as a Muslim, I think it's a very difficult job, especially in these times. Of course, when I married, I wasn't a Muslim. You promise in a way that you raise your children as Christians. So after I became Muslim, I'm not raising my children as Christians, of course. If the kids have questions about Christianity, they ask my wife, they get Christian answers. And if they come to me, they get Islamic answers. But most of the time, she says, ask your father. And my wife cooks halal for everybody, so that's very sweet. She says, well, I'm not going to cook cook 5 meals, so everybody eats the same. You want halal, everybody eats halal. So in a way, it's like an organic process.
What was your heaviest and most regretful expression that you used for Islam?
I think Islam is a lie, because that's something I used to say. Islam is a lie, the Qur'an is poison. But when I said Islam is a lie, that's the whole religion and everything that comes with it. So that's like the highest level of jahiliyyah in a way. Yeah, that's something I regret, because it was like an umbrella and everything else was under this concept of Islam is a lie, because that was the core thought. And of course, I do blame myself, and I know there are a lot of people out there not practicing Muslims that do so. And in a way, I understand it, because in a political sense and in a social, cultural sense, everything I said and done is still there. I sometimes even hear arguments from people in my old party that I offended in a way. Yeah, that's something that bothers me, and that's one of the reasons that we founded an organization. It's called the IXC, Islam Experience Center, and we go to schools, primary school, high school, college, universities, but also to departments of the government, other social organizations, churches, to take away misconceptions about Islam, to share the message, to show Islam in its true colors. And we do it by virtual reality with the glasses, so it's a very fun experience as well. And we try to erase in a way the things I said and done in the past.
How should people research about Islam? Do you advise just searching at Google?
No, I would certainly not advise Google. It's the last thing I would advise. I said shut down the computer. No, I think it's very important that people read books, real books with pages and stuff. I would recommend Muhammad, His Life Based on the Earlier Sources of Martin Link's, the book I talked about earlier. It's a green book. And I think it's very important for people not just dive into the Qur'an, because it's a very complex book. And if you don't have anybody who can teach you what you read, especially most of the people who don't know anything about Islam are not fluent Arabic, classic Arabic speaking people. So you will read an interpretation of the Quran or a translation, and most of the time that's not the real deal, of course. So I would advise people just to study the Sirat, study the character and the life of the Prophet, because that's what the tradition teaches us as well. His life was the Quran. He was the living Quran in a way. Just study his Sunnah, and I think that is the best way of discovering Islam.
What would you like to say as your final comments?
I became much more happy after I became Muslim. So I would like to invite everybody to become a Muslim, just because it brings peace to your soul and peace to your heart. It is the truth. It resonates with heart and soul. At least look at it from an Islamic perspective. Try to read and study the life of the Prophet. Try to understand what the Muslims believe. Not so much the behavior of Muslims, because there are a lot of Muslims that don't live like Muslims, including myself. I don't always live like a Muslim. I should, we all do, but you should look at the example of all examples, and it was the Prophet. And if you study his life, perhaps you find guidance that leads you to the truth.